The JEC Saloons and GTs bookended July, with meetings at the start of the month at Castle Combe and the end of the month at Brands Hatch. I was raring to go at my home circuit, and qualifying top of the class left me well set for the race. My first reliability failing of the year felt a bit cruel, but it did set up an awesome race 2 in prospect, starting from the back in the damp. By the time we exited Quarry Corner, I was side by side for the head of the class, and I went on to try and trouble the Class C and D cars up ahead. A couple of big dives at Quarry saw me past the Coppox in their straight 6 and V12 powered XJSs, and I was closing on the group up ahead of Colin Philpott, Mike Holt and Tom Lenthal. Up front, it was Tom Robinson in the supercharged machine who wrestled control of both races, but not for the want of trying by James Ram, trying so hard in fact that he dropped it towards the closing stage of the race at Quarry. His recovery saw us briefly go wheel to wheel, but I didn't have much chance of keeping the current championship holder behind me. I had managed to work my way up to the tail end of the Class C cluster of Philpott, Holt and Lenthal, but ultimately I came up just a lap or two short of being able to really get involved. Still though, it was a 6th place finish, which, starting from the back, I had to be happy with that, and more crucially, it was another class win. I can't really go on to summarise the events of Brands Hatch without addressing the incident that occurred on Saturday afternoon, where a volunteer marshal was tragically killed. As racers, we acknowledge the risks that we take. We have some responsibility for them, an element of control over what happens to us in the car, and the marshals just don't have that luxury. And although incidents happen, they're going to happen, it's the nature of what we're doing. You never expect to see someone else get hurt. It's a really tragic, horrible incident that I hope we never see repeated. I can't really pay enough tribute to the boys and girls in orange. They come out every weekend doing what they do so that we can do what we do. They volunteer to do it, they do it for the love of it, and in that sense they epitomise everything that's good about motorsport. And going forwards, collectively, we need to do everything we can to make sure that every single one of those guys gets home safe every day. And so it was on to Brands Hatch, where the Jaguars mixed their grid with the classic touring cars Boss series, a series for fast forwards of every generation. Although it looks slightly odd to see the big Jags amongst the tiny Anglias and the like, these cars were quick throughout the grid and they pushed us hard. I'd qualified top of the class, but the margin was very narrow back to Rick Walker and Derek Pearce behind, so I knew I'd have my work cut out for me in race 1. My start had been spectacularly average, and I was engulfed by Class B GT cars as we went down paddock and up towards Druids, but it was Mikey Holt who saved my bacon. His spin at Druids left Rick and Derek with nowhere to go, and I snuck through on the inside. Now, with a bit of breathing room, I was able to comfortably bring the class win home. Okay, so that was a lie. What actually happened was that Rick Walker had speed that I didn't have an answer for. He reeled me in and was pushing me super hard, though you'll have to take my word for it as my rear camera went into potato mode halfway through this race. I did manage to scrape the class win by a matter of tenths, but I was riding my luck hard. Meanwhile up front, although no one really had an answer for the Zaxpeed Escort and the ridiculous Anglia, it was Colin Philpott who was leading the Jaguar charge. James Ram's absence meant that Tom Robinson scooped the Class D spoils, but the fastest Jaguar overall looked to be Philpott's machine, which was absolutely flying. Colin's luck was out for race 2 though, unfortunately, as a loose alternator connection put paid to his chances before we'd even left the assembly area. I left the grid now flanked by my two class rivals, and it was Rick Walker who was keen on making things decisive. He was up the inside, down Paddock Hill and into Druids, and I had to go long on the brakes and round the outside to keep him at bay. I'd used Martin Reynolds' Anglia to box Rick in, and it had helped me maintain the class lead, but my luck was going to run out at Graham Hill Bend. The Anglia was slightly wide of the apex, and I had to tighten my line, rather than clamber over the outside curb as I normally would do to get a good exit. Rick got the traction and got up my inside, and by the time I saw him coming it was too late to defend. I couldn't find a way to immediately fight back, and to be honest it took me a couple of laps to match Rick's pace, which was ballistic. I had Derek Pearce right up my chuff. The three of us were locked together for the lead of Class B. I was throwing absolutely everything that I had at Rick Walker, but on a tight and twisty track of fine margins, I couldn't find that decisive move. I had to show some caution with Derek hovering dangerously behind me, but it didn't stop me having a few looks at the green XJS in front. Brands Hatch isn't known for being easy to overtake, and Rick was taking full advantage of that, placing his car perfectly to keep me behind. The overtaking opportunities were reduced further when Tony Paxman's spin brought out the yellow flags on the way into clearways. The run through Surtees into clearways was pretty much the only part of the track that I was consistently getting a run at Rick, but a big dive to the inside had been ruled out now by these yellow flags, so instead I had to try and cut back on the exit, and I always came up just that little bit too short. I was plenty busy enough trying to find a way past Rick Walker, but the threat from Derek Pearce remained very real. I knew that if I couldn't deal with the XJS, I stood a good chance of being passed by the XK8. The tension in my car was palpable, you could have cut it with a knife, and the problems were mounting. My big heavy car was punishing its tyres as the race wore on, and with each passing lap I had less traction. I could really have done with a lap or two to chill out and nurse the car, but that simply wasn't going to happen. Every time there was half a sniff of blood, Derek's deep-chested monster was coming for me. This intense status quo had lasted for what felt like forever. Something had to give, and it was me. I was too eager to depower on the exit at Druids, and the resulting wrestle for control spat me onto the grass on the exit. Derek happily gobbled up the gracious gift of second in class, and now it was his turn to frustrate me as I half-heartedly tried to fight back. But in reality, my pace was dropping off fast. It wasn't long before Malcolm Harding came knocking in the Zaxpeed Escort to put a lap on us. Usually, racing drivers aren't so pleased to be lapped, but I welcomed it with open arms. With the three cars converging ahead of me, there was the potential for them to compromise each other, which might open up an opportunity for me. Now, things were looking exciting. We'd all converged again, and I knew from having him behind me that Derek had horsepower that would give him opportunities that I hadn't had. Surely he was going to attack Rick. It would all open up again. All it needed was a lap or two, and it could be anyone's race. What I didn't know was that we were on the last lap, so that wasn't actually going to happen at all. The sight of the checkered flag was agonising for me. I let the tyres know exactly how I felt. Well, what can I say? Up until this point, I'd won Class B in every race that I'd finished. A man can only show so much maturity when faced with a third place finish in those circumstances. Nah, really? I wasn't frustrated at finishing third. I was frustrated that such a brilliant race had been brought to a cruel end right as it appeared to be reaching its crescendo. What a fantastic race that was. I've had good races with multiple cars before, but when it's for class honours, that extra edge just makes it brilliant. It really was pushing to the limits, sweating buckets, madly awesome. Maybe it wasn't so brilliant for the championship, and although I'm still leading, it's not by what I would call a comfortable margin. And as we face up the final 3 rounds of the season, I'm looking at a track that I've raced at once and crashed at once, which is a 100% record for any statisticians out there. I'm looking at a track which is massively power hungry and is probably going to see me suffering badly. And then we finish up with a track that I've never even been to before. So I'm not going to take anything for granted. It's going to be an interesting end to the season. Anyway, Combe was good, Brands was brilliant, on to Cadwell.